Radha Madhava Vanda Bihari Radha Madhava Jaya Radha Madhava Vanda Bihari Radha Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivara Hari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivara Hari Yashodhanandana Rajadanandana Yashodhanandana Rajadanandana Jamuna Tira Jamuna Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivara Hari Jai Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivara Hari Yashodhanandana Rajadanandana Yashodhanandana Rajadanandana Yamuna Tira Bhattari Yamuna Tira Bhattari Radha Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare 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 Jai Radha Madhava 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 Time Vishupar Paramahamsa Pri Vrajagacharya Stotra Supta Sri Srimad His Divine Grace Hila Boy Sharanaravinda Bhakti Vedanta Swami Sri Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Iskand Viti Founder Acharya Divine Grace Hila Prabhupada Ki Namacharya Sri Haridas Thakur Ki Samaveta Bhakti Vrinda Ki Harinam Sankirtan Ki Grantara Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Nitai Gaura Premanande. All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru, to Sri Gauranga, all glories to Sri Prabhupada. Om Agyanatimirandasya Gyananjana Salakaya Chakshurandaritam Jena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Tadati Swapadantikam Bandeham Sri Guru Sri Juta Padakamanam Sri Gurun Vaishnavam Sya Sri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatan Vitam Tvam Sadivam Tadvaitam Savaditam Paritana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Sri Vishakam Scha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Anamami Hari Priye Vansakalpatarubhyasya Kripa Sindhubhyaiva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narotamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraya. Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is a very means of conquest, let us first offer respectful obeisances unto Narayana, Supreme Personality of Godhead, unto Narayan Rishi, the Supreme Human Being, unto Mother Saraswati, the Goddess of Learning, and unto Srila Vyasadeva, the author. Nasta Praya Shabadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Tamashloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naistiki. By regularly hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam and by rendering service unto the pure devotee, all that is troublesome within the heart becomes destroyed practically to nil, and loving devotional service unto the Supreme Lord, who is praised with transcendental songs, becomes established as an irrevocable fact. Idam Bhagavatam Nama Puranam Brahmasamitam Tamashloka Saritam Sakara Bhagavan Rishi Nishreya Kasya Dhanyam Swasya Namaha. The Srimad Bhagavatam, known as the Grantaraj, the king of all Vedic literatures, is the literary incarnation of God. It is compiled by the incarnation of God, the Srila Vyasadeva. It is meant for the ultimate good of all people. It is all successful, all blissful, and all perfect. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Sri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Sarabhyaya Namaha. Om Sarabhyaya Namaha. Om Sarabhyaya Namaha. Mukam karoti vacharam pangum langayase girim yat kripa tamam bande Shri Gurum Dinataram. Yat kripa tamam bande Shri Gurum Dinataram. Hare Krishna. Welcome to our Bhagavatam class. We continue from canto number 7, chapter 12. And this morning we are looking at 3 verses that are interconnected, 16, 17, and 18. Yes. 16, 17. 15, 14. So actually it's 15. 16. 17. Agno Guru Atmani. Okay. Bhutai Swa Damabhihi Pasyed Apravistam Pravistavat Agno Guravat Manicha Agno Guravat Manicha Sarva Bhuteshvadhukshajam Bhutai Swadhama Bhipashyad Apravistam pravistavat agno guravat manicha sarva bhuteshvadhukshajam bhutai swadhamabhipashyad apravistam pravistavat agno guravat manisha sarva bhuteshvadhukshajam bhutai swadhamabhipashyad apravistam pravistavat agno guradvatmanicha sarva bhuteshvadhukshajam bhutai swadham abhipasyad apravistam pravistavat agno guravatmanicha sarva bhuteshvadhukshajam bhutai swadham abhipasyad apravistam pravistavat agno. In the fire, the Guru, in the spiritual master, Atmani, in oneself, Cha, also, Sarvabhuteshu, in every living entity, Adhoksajam, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who cannot be seen or perceived with the material senses or other material senses. With the material eyes or other material senses. Bhutai, with all living entities. Swadhamabhihi, along with his lordship's paraphernalia. Pashyat, one shall see. Apravistam, not entered. Pravistovat, also entered. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Sridham Prabhupada Ki. One should realize that in the fire, in the spiritual master, in oneself, and in all living entities, in all circumstances and conditions, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vishnu, has simultaneously entered and not entered. Full controller of everything. The fire in the spiritual master in all circumstances and conditions, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vishnu, has simultaneously entered and not entered. He is situated externally and internally as the full controller of everything. Purport. Realization of the Supreme Personality of Godhead's omnipresence is the perfect realization of the Absolute Truth, to be attained through the study of the Vedic literatures. As stated in the Brahma Samhita 5:35, Andhantarasta Paramanu Tanyantarastam. The Lord is situated within the universe, within the heart of every living entity, and also within the atom. We should understand that whenever the Supreme Personality of Godhead is present, He is present with all His paraphernalia, including His name, form, associates, and servants. The living entity is part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and thus one should understand that since the Supreme Lord has entered the atom, the living entities are also there. One must accept the inconceivable quality of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. For no one can understand from the spiritual master, no one can understand from the material point of view how the Lord is all pervasive and yet is situated in His own abode. Goloka Vrindavan. This realization is possible if one strictly follows the regulative principles of asrama, brahmachari, grihastha, vanaprastha, and sannyas. Srila Madhvacharya says in this regard, Apravista sarvagataha, pravistas vanu rupavan, evam dvirupo bhagavan harir eko janardana. The Supreme Personality of Godhead in His original form has not entered everything, apravistaha, but in His impersonal form, He has entered, pravistaha. Thus, He has entered and not entered simultaneously. This is also explained in Bhagavad Gita 9:4, wherein the Lord says, Maya tatam idam sarvam jagat vyaktamurtina vatstani sarvabhutani na chaham deshvavastitaha. Translation, and by me, in my unmanifested form, this entire universe is pervaded. All beings are in me, but I'm not in them. The Lord can defy Himself. And thus, there is variety in unity. Ekatvam bahutvam. Translation again to text 15. One should realize that in the fire, in the spiritual master, in oneself, and in all living entities, in all circumstances and conditions, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vishnu, has simultaneously entered and not entered. He is situated externally and internally as the full controller of everything. So this is the vision of a devotee, of someone who is enlightened. One realizes the Lord everywhere. Here it mentions specifically fire, because in Vedic culture, Jagya is meant to be performed, and Jagya cannot be performed without fire. In the spiritual master, that is also an essential component in Vedic culture. Without spiritual master, Prabhupada used to comment regarding Gandhiji, how Gandhiji was a great advocate of the Bhagavad Gita. He was always carrying, it says that when he was assassinated, he was carrying Bhagavad Gita, I heard. But Prabhupada points out that he could not leave politics and just devote himself to preaching. Main reason being that he had never taken guru. He did not take spiritual master, which is the standard recommended process in Vedic culture. Evam parampara praptam, the knowledge, transcendental knowledge, descends from in disciplic succession. So one needs to see the presence of the Lord in fire, in the spiritual master, also in oneself. We need to develop this understanding, this consciousness that we are, as again and again Srila Prabhupada was reminding us, we are not this body. We are the spirit soul. So therefore, the more we understand, the more we realize we are the spirit soul, we will act on the level of the spirit soul, isn't it? Yeah. So fire, spiritual master, oneself, and all living entities. That means we are constantly, always surrounded by so many living entities. And the main or similar quality or characteristic of all living entities is that they're living because of the presence of the Lord. And it's not only animate, there's animate, inanimate. Animate living entities, those who have life. A rock doesn't have life, but the Lord is also present in every atom. So he's present in the rock also. So therefore, Prabhupada would explain, someone who develops that vision, he sees Krishna everywhere, isn't it? That is the real meaning of Krishna consciousness. Krishna consciousness means we see Krishna everywhere. Pandita Samadarshinaha. Pandita Samadarshinaha. We develop that consciousness, that understanding. And therefore we are aware or conscious of our, what is it? Duty, our primary duty and responsibility in life. Yeah. So and the point in the translation also being made is that the Lord is simultaneously present and not present. How is that? Only the Lord has this ability of being what seems to be contradictory. Just like we're sitting here in this apartment, we're not anywhere else. But the Lord is present here and he's present everywhere else. The Lord is present in Vaikuntha, in Goloka Vrindavan, and he's simultaneously present here in the material world. When the Lord performs his pastimes, he's also present in the spiritual world. This is, of course, the Lord is present in his personal feature when he performs his pastimes, and he's also present in his we can say, impersonal feature. Through his energy, the Lord is fully present through his energy. And the important point being mentioned here at the end of the purport by Srila Prabhupada is that we can only realize this kind of understanding, this kind of, you could say, mindset, this way of thinking. Here it is explained how this is possible, how to develop this consciousness. It is only possible if we agree to live within the recommended, prescribed ashram. This is mentioned here. This realization is possible if one strictly follows the regulative principles of ashrama. Brahmachari, Grihastha, Vanaprastha, and Sannyas. That means that if we don't even know about ashramas, which is a situation for most people in the world, people don't know about that there are varnas and ashramas. And therefore, it is not possible to realize this presence of Krishna everywhere. Means it is not possible to become obviously Krishna conscious. Even for those who are devotees, we are practicing Krishna consciousness, but the point is being underlined here, unless one is very strictly following the regulative principles that are prescribed within each ashram. There are prescribed regulations. Of course, Prabhupada also mentioned earlier how the same basic regulations need to be followed in all the ashramas. And therefore, when that is done, we have personalities like Ramananda Roy, who, although a grihastha, although not from a Brahmana family, because he's following the principles of Krishna consciousness, he becomes a fully self-realized personality. And he is able to, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu chooses him, isn't it? Please explain to me about the nature of the absolute truth. This very nice conversation that we find in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. So it means that there is no bar, regardless of one's background, to developing this understanding. Everyone can actually become advanced. Everyone can become Krishna conscious, regardless of one's material situation or background. So therefore, the importance of knowing about, this very, the more we study about the varnas and ashramas, we begin to understand how very systematic, how very scientific the whole setup has been arranged by Krishna, naturally. So therefore, we should not minimize the importance of these varnas and ashramas, as we are seeing, especially like in this purport, in this verse. It is by respecting the various guidelines that are given in these ashramas, varnas as well, that more easily one can make advancement in spiritual life. Of course, one may say, well, all we have to do is chant Hare Krishna, which is also true. If one fully, completely surrenders to the holy name, then one can achieve the same result. But that is not so easily done. And there are many exchanges that Srila Prabhupada had with devotees in on the subject matter, actually, of Varnasrama Dharma. And Srila Prabhupada would explain how this process or system of Varna and Asrama is necessary to practice or to follow. And there's very nice statements made by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who says that it becomes easier. It becomes easier to practice spiritual life. It becomes easier to advance in spiritual life when we work, when we agree to live or to work within these systems of varnas and ashramas. So let's go to 16. 16 continues the same theme here. Evam vidho brahmachari vanaprasto yatir grihi. So the 4 ashrams are there. Charan vidita vignana param brahmadigachyati. Translation and purport: by practicing in this way, whether one be in the brahmachari ashram, grihastha ashram, vanaprastha ashram, or sannyas ashram, one must always realize the all-pervading presence of the Supreme Lord. For in this way it is possible to understand the absolute truth. Report: this is the beginning of the self-realization. One must first understand how Brahman is present everywhere and how he is acting. This education is called Brahma Jigyasa and is the real concern of human life. Without such knowledge, one cannot claim to be a human being. Rather, he remains in the animal kingdom. As it is said, Saeva go kara. Without such knowledge, one is no better than a cow or an ass. So same is being elaborated here, that within any of these ashramas, one can realize, and so this interesting point here, Prabhupada explains how this is the beginning of self-realization. To see, to see the Lord present through his energy. In other words, one devotee was giving a class on this some time back, how we can become self-realized by studying the creation, by being aware, by being conscious of how this material nature is working. Those are scientists, for example. I think it was Albert Einstein who was mentioning that well, he would read, he was very much appreciating Bhagavad Gita, and he also made a statement whereby the more he studies material nature, the more he realizes how very insignificant and small that he is. You see, because that is our root problem. We think we are very intelligent. We think we are very important. We think too much about ourselves on the body platform, uh, and we forget how very insignificant we are, and how at any moment we this body can just start to fall apart. Uh, I had one of my disciples in Indonesia a few years ago. He was a young man. Young man means in his 30s, the teacher, and he used to come to the temple regularly, married. Um, and then one day he came to me and he said, "You know, since yesterday I can't hear anymore on my right side." And then somehow it's like within a very short period of time, not only he could not hear from his right side, then he couldn't hear from the left side, and then it's like some kind of uh, whole uh, all kinds of a series of major problems uh, in his body. In other words, we are all conditioned, and we're all programmed. This body, we don't know, is already it's already determined, and none of us uh, know how long this body will remain in, or how it will be functioning as well. So, one who is uh, attentive in studying the material nature and the workings of material energy will gradually come to that understanding that there there is something behind, isn't it? The workings of material nature. There's a whole plan and a whole design, which naturally means that there's some intelligence way beyond my minute small intelligence. And then text 17 is the beginning of a series of um, instructions, which we will be reading tomorrow as part of the class. But I'll just read 17. It's Vanaprasthasya Vakshyami Niyaman Muni Samatan Yan Asthaya Munir Gatsched Rishi Lokam Uhanjasa. Translation: O King, again, Narada Muni is speaking here. I shall now describe the qualifications for a vanaprastha, one who has retired from family life. By rigidly following the rules and regulations for the vanaprastha, one can easily be elevated to the upper planetary system known as Maharloka. This is, of course, on the material level, uh, simply by following, just like if someone strictly follows the vows of brahmachari life, brahmachari ashram, he will automatically be promoted to certain planets. Of course, if he is fortunate, in addition to following the vows of brahmachari life, to know about Krishna consciousness, one will be elevated beyond. One will be elevated to the spiritual world, to Goloka, Vrindavan. So, in this section, we'll look at this tomorrow. The importance of vanaprastha ashram. So this is something which, in modern society, what's the general mindset of people? Let me retire, and you know, I've saved up money. Um, Now I don't have to work anymore, so I will travel and enjoy, isn't it? I mean, the whole in retired life, the whole idea of people work very hard, put money aside, thinking that okay, in retired life, now I will, I will somehow, in different ways, try to enjoy, which means that the majority of people are missing the point completely that retired life is not now that I'm working, I just can enjoy myself in different types of leisure activities. But no, retired life means retired from material activities or from material entanglement. Retired life, mm, vanaprastha life, means utilizing those precious years that are given to us at that time, where we no longer have family responsibilities as householders do. We don't have a job. We don't have so many activities that are generally entangling for most people. And we can actually fully concentrate and absorb ourselves in spiritual devotional activities. It's just like we see many uh, of those who are householders, grihastas, they have very less time uh, to come to the temple because they're working, they're traveling, so many things. They have different responsibilities. um, so, uh, in other words, the stage of vanaprastha is a very important part of the system of Varnasrama. Uh, it is the third ashram, and when we are lacking, this was the case in the beginning of our movement. We didn't have, in it, the only elderly person we had was Srila Prabhupada in the beginning, practically, and he was a sannyasi. So our first generation of devotees, uh, mainly disciples of Srila Prabhupada, uh, did not experience, did not see, did not have the opportunity to exchange, let's say, with people in Vanaprastha stage. And that's possibly one reason why it has been difficult for the first generation to actually take up. Of course, we do have some devotees who are in Vanaprastha stage. Uh, the point being that when there are a good number of individuals who are taking up this role or responsibility of Vanaprastha, they are very, very important assets. Elderly people in the Vanaprastha stage can be very helpful to, let's say, younger devotees, uh, to guide them about grihastha life, because they spent at least 25 years or more as grihastas. So they have all kinds of knowledge and experience that they can share with others. Those who are in the vanaprastha stage of life, being very experienced, being very knowledgeable also, they very often can become teachers. They can start gurukulas, for example. Yeah, those in vanaprastha stage, they have less responsibility, so they can They can also, because they are meant to focus on advancing spiritually, they very often will come to a uh, holy place and they'll be serving, let's say, as um, husband and wife in different activities in the temple. So there are different ways in which people in the Vanaprastha stage, one one needs to prepare oneself to enter Vanaprastha, and of course that instruction was given, and that uh, it is based on how nicely, how seriously one follows the prescribed uh, recommended practices in the Vanaprastha stage, or in the Grihastha ashram. Then one will, if one follows nicely the prescribed regulations as a brahmachari, he'll become an ideal grihastha. And similarly, if one follows nicely the rules and regulations within the grihastha ashram, he'll become an ideal vanaprastha, like that. So I'll just read the first of the verses we have gone through today, which is text 15. One should realize that in the fire, in the spiritual master, in oneself, and in all living entities. So four distinct uh, places here are mentioned. In all circumstances and conditions, the Supreme Personality of Godhead Vishnu has simultaneously entered and not entered. He is situated externally and internally as the full controller of everything. So personalities like Prahlad Maharaj, he was fully convinced of that, and therefore was able to defy his atheistic father, Hiranyakashipu, and because he was so fixed in his conviction, deeply conscious of the actual presence of the Lord everywhere. Therefore, uh, the Lord chose to come out of the pillar, as we all know. So that type of conviction, that level of realization, we should be endeavoring for. So, any thoughts or comments on this? Yeah. The general rule after 50 should take Vanapasta. Yes. Is there any age limit for retirement for a brahmachari and sannyasi? Brahmacharis and sannyasis don't retire. Prabhupada didn't retire, you know? No. Huh? The real meaning of retirement. No, retirement means to retire from material activities. To retire from Maya. I give up. So if you're working somewhere, you retire, you stop working, right? You're no longer connected with that job. So we've been working for Maya for all these so many lifetimes. So now we want to retire from that. So we give up. We cut our association, and when we retire from Maya, that means that we now decide fully to absorb ourselves in Krishna conscious activities, isn't it? So it is only actually the grihastas who experience this retirement from that lifestyle. Of course, a grihasta, actual grihasta, uh, even before taking vanaprastha, will be Krishna conscious. So he's not retiring from uh, from uh, from Krishna consciousness. He's retiring from a situation where he had to give, his time for different activities, which sometimes were taking him away from being more involved in Krishna consciousness. Because as a grihastha, one has all kinds of uh, family and social responsibilities, etc. And uh, there are more, generally, there are more distractions in householder life, uh, raising up children, making money to support the family, so many different duties and responsibilities. So one retires from these duties and responsibilities because one has, if one has followed nicely, one has executed the duties of the grihastha by raising one's children in a Krishna conscious way. And now that they have grown up, then they can go take up their own uh, responsibilities, ideally as devotees, and father and mother who are now in their uh, getting older, in their 50s or more, then they can fully, completely give their time, their attention, and concentrate on uh, their own individual practice of Krishna consciousness, as well as the overall preaching movement. So retirement is for grihastas. Yeah.
One thing that Vanaprastha means who is eligible to take means if there only Grihastha can take Vanaprastha or a Brahmachari is also can he take Vanaprastha and how many years the Vanaprastha can go like Brahmachari is up to means generally we say
Yeah.
like 25 we say like Brahmachari can say it means leave and after that you can go to the Grihastha. So
Okay.
is there any age limit for the Vanaprastha?
Okay. What is the age limit for Vanaprastha? We were reading a little earlier how for someone who goes to Gurukul, after finishing his studies, he can either enter the Grihastha ashram, can enter the Vanaprastha ashram, or can enter the Sannyas ashram. So, or he can remain brahmachari. So, although generally brahmachari will be up to the age of 25, we were discussing the other day, most brahmacharis, most individuals who receive brahmachari training, most will enter householder life around the age of between 20 25, let's say. Uh, and the normal age for grihastha, as we know, is up until the age of 15. If so a brahmachari can remain brahmachari whole life. Vanaprastha can also remain vanaprastha for his whole life. Uh, or one who is in vanaprastha, the male, not the ladies, can take sannyas. So here's a specific injunction. People who advocate that men and women are totally equal. Well, in our Vedic culture, and this was a very clear, specific uh, instruction given by Srila Prabhupada that ladies don't take sannyas, women don't take sannyas. So there is a difference, isn't it? And that's a whole other discussion, of course. But the point being that to answer your question, one can be a lifelong brahmachari, one can be a lifelong vanaprastha, one can be a lifelong grihastha. I mean, sannyasi, but one cannot be a lifelong grihastha. One should not be a lifelong grihastha. Yeah. Ah. One should, so there's no age limit or time limit for someone. I remember I was surprised actually many years back when visiting villages and sometimes would come across some Gaudiya Mat. So naturally we would, Gaudiya Mat is Vaishnavas, so we would go and take darshan. And then I was surprised sometimes in some of these old mats, temples, maybe that were established by Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. There was one, sometimes either a very aged, elderly brahmachari doing the puja, or sometimes an elderly sannyasi as pujari in the temple. So we were not accustomed, again, in the early days of the movement, there were no vanaprasthas and there were no elderly brahmacharis. There were only young brahmacharis, mostly. And the majority of devotees who joined it ki Gaur Pimanandi Hare Krishna.